Another edition of the Trey Wallace Podcast, powered by OutKick. Happy to be joined by Southeastern Conference Commissioner Greg Sankey this afternoon. Commissioner, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Absolutely, and thank you for taking the time to sit down and discuss what's been an interesting 4 years and an interesting time that is coming for the Southeastern Conference. And I kind of want to start with the most recent news with Texas and Oklahoma sorting out their situation with the Big 12, going to be able to join the Southeastern Conference July 1st, 2024. I'm interested, I remember sitting there and you making the comment and you making the announcement years ago at SEC Media Days, and I'm interested in what was the first, let's say, domino to fall for them to be able to hop into the SEC a year early from your standpoint, because that 4 years, 5 years, it's a while to wait on members to join.
It is. And I think in the moment of invitation at the end of 2021, I was immediately asked about a different entry date. And I explained, I think, really consistently that the issue of departure was based upon the media agreements between the Big 12 and their media partners and the Big 12 and its member institutions. And those really were the initial dominoes, the ability for all of those entities to work through rights issues, revenue issues, to facilitate departure, which then leads to that transition. And I think back then when people would observe, well, nobody's ever declared a transition and waited 4 years, I said, you know what, you're right. But in the aftermath of expansion around 2010, 11, 12, a variety of points of movement, including Texas A&M and Missouri joining the SEC, the Big 12 structured these agreements that really created the timing, and then the ability to work through those agreements is what created the change in entry at this point.
The conversation over the last number of years has been, okay, what does the future look like for the SEC when it comes to scheduling? Being down in Destin last spring, that was the hot button topic, besides somebody leaking out a format of where the coaches were going to be sitting inside those meetings. But you look back on it right now, and there is a lot of talk of a 9-game conference schedule. In your opinion, what makes you have to come? You're getting so many ideas from different ADs or presidents or people involved around college football. That discussion on a 9-game format, it's not like it's all of a sudden just come up now in your meetings with other officials. What's that process been like, if that is the way the conference goes?
We started with your observation about a busy 4 years. And if we go back 4 years from right now, in the spring of 2019, our membership asked us, and this is when we were at 14, to look at an updated scheduling model for a 14-member conference. So well before there was any consideration of membership growth, that was announced, as you'll remember, in 21. We were digging in as a conference office based on our 14 schools saying, hey, go look at what future scheduling could look like and take off some of the restraints, the expectation for divisions, perhaps a single division, the number of games, how opponents rotate. We actually were planning in March of 20 to present an initial level of research to our presidents and chancellors at our meeting at our men's basketball tournament in Nashville. And obviously that changed completely to play or don't play and not play at all. And then that research project went on hold really for a year. And then at the end of that year is when expansion took place. So we had laid a lot of groundwork on what could the future look like. And when we announced the expansion, I basically said two things right up front. Let's engage in blue sky thinking, which is meant to look really broadly at the possibilities. And the second was we needed to rotate our teams through all of our campuses with greater frequency. And so let's look at a scheduling model that would facilitate that. Now some cross-divisional opponents, it's 12 years between visits. And then we went into a discussion with athletics directors, both as in a group setting and individually, really for about 6 months. What do they want? What are their priorities? The words fairness and balance are always talked about. Then we had to define those. And the fairness issue is rotation. The balance issue is frequent rotation through schedules. The fairness issue is kind of a competitive bandwidth. That can be accomplished in a number of ways. We looked at 40 plus different models with all kinds of submodels off of those. Long answer to say, we're going to walk up to, is it a divisional format or is it a single divisional format? What are the continuing annual opponents? What are those that rotate? Is it 8 or 9? And then how often do we see everyone rotate through the schedules? I think we have from today about 90 days to figure that out. I'd welcome the chance to make decisions before we go to Destin. When we were in Destin last year, I said we're poised to make a decision. We ultimately said, if we wait, we can learn a lot about CFP, other conference media deals, look more deeply at tiebreakers if we're in a single division. And we've learned an immense amount, I think exponentially more than we would have predicted in May, as we've seen some conference membership movement, the CFP format change, and that's going to help us make a better decision.
Being down in Destin last year and being around the meetings and listening to the coaches and you speak about this topic, how crazy is it that, and it's not crazy because everything in college football or kind of athletics, it's kind of methodical, but you think back to where we were last spring. Now, all of a sudden, we're getting the college football playoff expansion. Texas and Oklahoma are going to join early. Other conferences are adding their teams that will join in the near future as well. It's almost as if it played out perfectly for the SEC and for you and your committee and coaches and ADs that maybe nothing was voted on last spring, and now you get an opportunity to kind of reorganize with everything that's changed in college football.
We literally at the meeting talked about moving forward then and pulled back, looked at the big picture, and the statement was, hey, there's going to be a lot that happens. And so the thought then was perhaps we come back in October and make the decision. And then we saw this Big 12 consideration becoming a bit more active. And just to validate the central theme of your question, yes, we have learned more than we would have anticipated. And one of the COVID summer learnings was the longer we waited, the more we learned, the better decision we made. When people acted early, I think that's when the decisions were short on some information. Not, they felt that was the right time. So I don't want to overweight, not W-E-I-G-H-T, but
right.
Overweight, W-A-I-T, my time. But I think our patience has been rewarded with a more complete picture of the college football landscape.
And your hope is, you can hope all you want, but your hope is that before you guys get down to Destin, maybe there is some kind of resolution that can be voted on potentially when it comes to scheduling before you get down to the meetings. Is that kind of the barrier we're looking at right now?
Yeah, I think, okay, again, remember, I was asked a lot during that COVID summer, like, you've got to set a deadline. And I always extended the deadline. I look at the Destin meetings as our outer boundary. So between now and those Destin meetings, whether it's a special called meeting or a regular cycle, we need to move to conclusion, which means we're going to have to take votes. We have 14 active members empowered to vote. We've had Texas and Oklahoma participating with us, providing their perspective and feedback. Eventually, majority vote wins in these decisions, and then life moves on.
How active, with Texas and Oklahoma joining, Commissioner, how active have the conversations been with them, like them being involved in the, I don't want to say day-to-day operations of the SEC, but for the future of the conference? It was interesting. You said something last year at the spring meetings that you're kind of keeping them up to date on what's going on. Has that changed over the last 6 to 7 months?
To a certain extent, yes. And Other elements, no. So you're right. There's not an involvement in current policies and decisions. We have invited the athletics directors, really starting last January, to our in-person meetings, with a couple of exceptions that we're not at our Destin meetings, which are big annual meetings, and we generally meet in October. So they've been able to have continuity. We've zoomed them in to some meetings where we'll talk about the future decisions. And then we've had staff at events looking at their operations. We have different expectations than the Big 12 conference, and so they'll have to adjust. We've been through that activity previously. And then we have kind of monitoring what's going on, video conferences every few weeks. So we've developed relationships. We actually hosted a delegation from both universities here in mid-December, an orientation. We engaged in that activity with Missouri and Texas A&M. It was the spring of 12, and remember, they were joining in the summer of 12. So we're well ahead of that learning curve, or that kind of informational curve from our last expansion. And that will accelerate now that we have clarity on the 24 entry.
When you say bigger expectations, is that from a network standpoint? Is that from, hey, this is what we need, from a television rights agreement? This is what we need from even hosting, visiting fans. I mean, it's a broad kind of expectations, correct?
All of that. Yep. So we start with how we manage games, how what our media contracts require, what our calendar looks like, our championships rotation. So, we'll be in Nashville, for example, in a few weeks with men's basketball. Greenville hosts women's basketball. But then we have a set of campuses, as we talk, swimming and diving is in College Station. Next week, indoor track and field in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Those are realities that they'll then be brought into. So it's education about all of how we function and make decisions. And there's more of that to still come.
I know there are a lot of fans from different teams that would like to attend games. Let's use Georgia, Texas A&M as an example. I'm sure a lot of Georgia fans would love to go to College Station and enjoy that atmosphere. I've been there. You've been there a ton. It's just, and I'm only using one, environment, but that is a game that kind of stands out between two teams that hasn't been played. How big is that to you as we get to a different scheduling format over the next years to make these games happen, let's say every other year? When we change everything, and I know ADs and presidents and people are hitting you up every day about scheduling formats and who they want on their schedule, but how big is it to you that we get some of maybe these matchups that we don't see on the regular?
My view is that's really important. And I'll go back. I'll use a College Station example. When Kentucky played Texas A&M in College Station in football, and this was pre-COVID, so 18, 19.
Right.
You'll forgive me on the specific year memory.
Yeah.
They had 10, 12, 14,000 fans, Kentucky fans, at that game. Last fall, Tennessee fans in Baton Rouge. Just an enormous presence. And I think that's an indication that absolutely our fans want to make those trips. Well, we have incredible cities, and the addition of the Norman and Oklahoma City area is a great place to visit. Austin and Nashville. We have like the two best music cities in America, soon to be in the Southeastern Conference. And likewise, the fans from Oklahoma and Texas, I think, want to visit places, like Oxford and Fayetteville and Lexington, and just kind of go on and on. So part of, I think, everyone's motivation is to move people through. Now, whether that's every other year, it can be something better than once every 12 years. We know that. And it's a matter of the decision-making to find the right rotation and what that means for frequency of those opponents visiting home and away.
I know you're all about the Southeastern Conference and every team, but I look at two teams this year that kind of took a step in a direction to get their programs kind of turned around in football. One would be Tennessee. The other one would be LSU. in your perspective, and I know you're cheering for all the teams, but is it good for the conference? And I know economically it is and whatnot, but the reemergence of those teams after, LSU, I know they won a national championship, but they've been going through some things. Tennessee, a new coach coming in, 2 seasons in, Orange Bowl. What was that for the conference? How big was that for the conference to get more teams on that national landscape?
I think there's a few ways to answer that. To me, one of the thought points was the 2018 Georgia-Kentucky game, which was an East Division championship game.
Yep.
I think the fact that existed between Georgia and Kentucky in football is important to the conference. If you go back 25 seasons to Tennessee's national championship, we've had 6 different members win national championships. No other conference comes close. When Oklahoma joins in that same 25-year window, we'll have 8 members with Texas as well. Nobody comes close to that. So I think that what we want is the highest level competition across our currently 14 and soon to be 16 members. And I'm inattentive to the logos and the names, but you want consistent high level competition. So as programs, you have coaching changes, you have recruiting successes, you have injuries. There's a lot that goes into a season. But the year that Mississippi State was number 1 and Ole Miss was right there, I think that has meaning. We've had A&M ranked 5th after the 2020 season. Arguably could have been in the top 4. So I think what we do uniquely in football, and we do it in basketball, and we do it in gymnastics and baseball, is have this real breadth of the highest possible level of competition. We've had 4 different national champions in baseball in the last 4 years. And, one of them was of the 4, we had the number 1 team going in, number 1 seed that didn't make it to Omaha. So we've got this broad level of competition. That's part of what makes us really unique as a league.
And speaking of that real quick, how excited are you? We got basketball in full motion right now. The SEC tournament's coming up in Nashville and in Greenville with the women's side. Baseball kicking things off. First pitch is going to be on Friday. Softball already going on in the conference. To get these 2 other sports going, along with the track and field and the swim that is currently going on too, the SEC really made a statement last year with Ole Miss winning a national championship. You talked about Tennessee and their run that they had and the many others. Getting this started right now and trying to replicate what has been done in the past. How excited are you for baseball and softball to get rolling?
Yeah, the spring's fun. It warms up, number 1, right?
There you go.
People go outdoors. I really think back to the spring of 21 in our spring sports, particularly softball and baseball, when people came out again to experience normal. And I think we've continued to experience these crowds that realize this is really a cool way to spend a weekend in the spring, to be a part of our softball and baseball experiences. And we've seen that across the league. I think Tennessee is a really good example in that post-COVID area is they had success and people kept returning. Right now we have every sport competing on Friday except for football, volleyball, soccer, and cross country. This is, between now and really June 1st, the busiest few months. People will focus on football, which takes a great deal of attention every day of the year. But we have more taking place right now for the next few months than at any other point in the year.
Last 2 for you. You grew up in the Northeast area, and I've always kind of wondered this, being the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. How do you explain the SEC to folks back home? The passion that's here, it's different. And I'm wondering you might get a phone call from an old buddy of yours, or you're having a conversation, or you're somewhere. And I'm wondering how you kind of explain what the SEC is to the people that maybe don't have a clue.
Yeah. Well, you said it's just different. We use the tagline, it just means more, which is a frame around the importance of our universities and our communities within our states, within our region. which is a launching pad nationally. I think economically, socially, culturally, educationally, that's true. And it resonates with what we do in sports and football in particular. And I think that's the conveyance. Hey, it is just different. And I've had the opportunity late last week to visit with, I think, 4 or 5 people at a small college where I worked when my career started in central New York. And 2 of the 5 had degrees from our universities. I actually think there's more of that growth, that movement where people have touched it either as undergraduates in their master's program or as PhD students. In that meaning, they convey for us. And then the national platforms that we have, I actually think we moved to the ABC, ESPN platforms. We access more broadcast TV through that agreement than we've had with the CBS relationship. We can bring even more people to this field. And we want to continue to build the community around what we do and draw people in. And I think that transcends just our campuses. It transcends our region, and people see something really special. And, there's this natural inclination to be part of something bigger than oneself.
You gave a fantastic introduction, and I was sitting right there in the second row in Atlanta, and I videotaped the Mike Leach introduction that you gave him, and I was blown away. I was like, okay, this is probably the coolest and the craziest introduction I have ever heard in a long time with the SEC Media Days. It's been a minute. It's been a couple months now. Your thoughts on Mike Leach, what he did for the conference, what he did for college football as a head coach or just a coach in general?
Well, since that memorial in mid-December, I finished his book, Swing Your Sword. I've not read the book about Geronimo. And, the number one takeaway was I bought that book when he started at Mississippi State. And I'll get to it later. And I should have read that early in his tenure. And I often do that with our coaches, or, Ben Sass is now the president of the University of Florida. So I read one of his books just to understand their perspective. I wish I had done that really early in Mike's tenure here. And what's fascinating is to just see his background and how his coaching progressed, but to be at the memorial and have Lincoln Riley there to pay tribute. Gardner Minshew, I met in one of the prep rooms, a little salty in his memorial language, which was unique, but representative of their relationship. Now, remember, that was a Tuesday, and he was the starting quarterback for Philadelphia and in Dallas that weekend in a football game, but cared that much to represent and present his relationship. Hal Mummy being there to tell stories, and kind of on to current players. I think there's a connection to people that was missed. Like in the community at large, you could see him. He was this interesting guy. But when I had the conversation with him about the class he taught, he talked about the people who'd come in. And I think that was a good representation of Mike. And then to actually read how his air raid blossomed across high school, college, and into the NFL, I just didn't know until I really listened and watched people talking about that, and then read about his career and his life and his relationships. And then you go to, his relationships transcended football.
Yes.
Jimmy Buffett, and who's on his cell phone, Willie Nelson. I think some political leaders. In fact, I know political leaders. During the COVID summer, he's telling me about who's calling him, who I should be calling. I took some of that advice, but not all. I listened well. And as I said, you never schedule the 15-minute call with Mike. And it was, sometimes there were a couple tough messages, but an interesting conversation would be someplace in the dialogue.
To wrap things up, the future of the Southeastern Conference looks bright with the new television agreement with ESPN that will go into place. I think it benefits a lot. It's not just football and it's not just basketball. It's going to benefit a lot of different sports that the networks will be able to now put on more frequently than maybe they are able to at the moment. Let's just say over the next 5 to 6 years, is what would you like to see the biggest takeaway? Let's just say in 5 years from the new agreement that you have in place with ESPN and ABC that will benefit the Southeastern Conference going forward?
People will generally focus on the revenue, and so there's revenue tied to it. But we were really intentional in our thinking. And I mentioned broadcast TV, which I think is just north of 130 million households, where the cable universe is changing. That's down 80 to 85 total points of access. And so having more availability through football to place games on broadcast TV, more men's basketball opportunities on broadcast TV. This past weekend, because we don't have the limits, LSU and Connecticut were on, or excuse me, LSU and South Carolina were on ESPN. That could be an ABC game. UConn and USC were on Fox and had a huge viewership number for women's basketball. So I think those opportunities can be multiplied out. We also see the reality of digital provision, of streaming. And everybody has technology. Disney was early into that space, relatively speaking, and has an infrastructure that can be accessed. Right now, we've seen SEC Network Plus go away, and our fans are now accessing through their cable subscription, streaming of our games wherever they are. That's the adjustment that's going to take place over the next few years. But I start with the broadcast opportunities. I go to the fact that in football, because we'll be aligned with one set of networks, our kickoff times can be identified in great majority during the summertime, particularly the early kicks.
Yes.
And there'll be some flex games within a Saturday from afternoon to evening or evening to afternoon. We won't have these wait until 12 days, and then you find out, well, the game I want to do at 10 is going to be at 11 a.m. Central. Or a 6-day wait for huge movement between 11 a.m. or 8 p.m. And I think the ability to identify those games in the summer of 24 early, not all, but the majority of our kickoff times will be enormously helpful to our fan base, was actually one of the big priorities we had in the negotiating session, and part of what guided our decision making because of that unique opportunity with that ESPN, ABC, and then the ESPN Plus platforms.
Just for clarity on that real quick. So we're talking about, how a lot of fans have to sit around on social media and they have to wait until, maybe that Monday, if CBS wanted to flex, and they might have to wait on a time, which affects, travel, which affects going to games and what. So a part of this new agreement is you guys will have a better understanding of, hey, Alabama and Kentucky are going to kick off at 2:30. It's set in stone. Here's where it is, compared to maybe having to wait, 4 or 5 days before kickoff would actually happen, right?
Yeah, you start with the early games. So the early games will be at this point identified without a lot of movement. So you'll know in the summer around these early kickoffs. And then you could have some flipping between an afternoon slot and evening slot. That's a few hours. It's not the whole day where you're held up for everything. And what will happen is it won't be all of the games in the summertime. The majority of games will be identified. And then there'll be some for that flex time that would be an afternoon or evening time slot. Those will move to that Monday look at social media, primarily 12 days out, a little bit of 6 day. But again, it's not waiting for the entire schedule, which we've experienced. In recent years, it will be really what platform will the game be broadcast on? And then is there any exchange between an afternoon and an evening time slot?
It's going to be a lot different, Commissioner, with, those 7 o'clock primetime kicks compared to the afternoon, maybe 3:30, 2:30, big games of the day. And they're all big, but you know what I mean by that when it comes to maybe the national attention and what it could do for the conference. So it seems like you got a lot on your plate coming up over the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, we do. And remember, like last year, the Tennessee-Georgia game was a CBS game. So that day we had one broadcast TV game. LSU at Alabama at LSU was an ESPN game. When we go to this new contract, it's a 24 season. Those could both be on broadcast TV potentially, which again, it just multiplies exponentially the reach comparatively. And we'll have the 3:30 time slot on broadcast TV on ABC every week.
Right.
But the ability to maybe have an early game on ABC, which is a great viewing time, or a late game, those options emerge for us in this new agreement. And
it also kind of helps too, where, you know, you can put as many doubleheaders as you want on the schedule. You don't have to like limit that to 2 per year, which is under the contract now. Commissioner Sankey, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. Hope you have a great rest of the month. We're getting close to, you know, baseball season starting off. We're going to have the SEC tournaments coming up and a lot more going on. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Appreciate you.